You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel.
And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious episode of the Assembly Call, as tonight your Indiana Hoosiers defeated Miami University 76-57, moving the Hoosiers to 7-2 on the season. This game was one where IU got out to a really good start, jumped on Miami early, let them back in it, particularly toward the end of the first half, and only took a 3-point lead to the locker room. But a big run about midway through the second half really put IU over the top. Miami went scoreless for a stretch there. IU went on, I think, a 12-0 run, probably some other runs if you looked at different segments there, but some impressive runs from them over that stretch, and really pulled away at that point and ended up winning the game by 19 points. It was a game that featured some really strong individual performances by a number of guys, including Omar Ballo, who ended up with 18 rebounds on the game and actually led the team in assists, but also had some moments of play that were some of the same habits that we've seen this team fall into in other games in the non-conference, whether that be allowing offensive rebounds, turning the ball over, and things like that. So if you want to be happy for a win, we got something for you. If you want to be angry about how the team played, probably got something for you there. So, kind of an uneven performance that results in what at the beginning of the night, if you told me they win by 19 points, probably would have been pretty excited to see that. But some different things played out and gives us some things to talk about here on the postgame show on a Friday night. So, and we will do just that. I'm your host, Andy Bottoms, here with the coach, Bob Moats. Not sure Ryan may or may not be joining us, but we're going to break it all down for you on this edition of the Assembly Call IU postgame show. And we'll start this one the way we do every show, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And to me, that really came during that stretch in the second half. There were a couple big plays. Miami had cut the lead. They made a really tough three, cut the lead to 55-50. But a couple big plays shortly thereafter. The first one that I noted was Myles Rice drives the lane, kicks it to Trey Galloway in the corner for a three. That pushed the lead to 61-50. And then a few minutes later, Luke Goody just didn't give up on a play. Ballo got blocked by the rim. Goody picks it up, puts it back in, and is fouled. And his and one capped that 12-0 run, put IU up 67-50. The two teams basically played even from there. So that was really the stretch that defined the margin of victory for IU in this game, and led by a few guys who had some really big moments in the game tonight. But that 12-0 run, like I said, put IU over the top and is tonight's banner moment. And our banner moment today, as always, is brought to you by our friends at Homefield Apparel, who is now in their 8th season sponsoring the Assembly Call, and their 4th as a presenting sponsor for the Back Home Network. Homefield, as you know, has the largest collection of vintage IU apparel that you will find anywhere. And since IU is their flagship school, more high-quality gear with unique IU logos from the past are always right around the corner. Obviously, with the success of the football program, have launched a number of shirts to celebrate the greatest season in IU football history. You had 9 Windiana, 10 Windiana, 11 Windiana, Signetti shirts, all that. You can go. I've got the oval sweatshirt on, probably because I don't think Jared's going to show up, so he won't get mad about that. But lots of great IU gear, and certainly still time to do some holiday shopping for friends and family who, ideally would want IU stuff. But if they don't like IU, they've got countless other universities that you can go and find gear for that you will love and that they will love receiving from you. So you can also recently released a bunch of new embroidered quarter zips. It was kind of changeover from the way those were before. So if you're looking for something a little bit different, they have those as well. But no matter what you buy from Homefield, you can be sure that it's going to be comfortable and the colors will last. And as I mentioned, they do have some deals around the holidays. Make sure you check their social media, sign up to get their text alerts and emails to find out what the latest promos are. But you can always use ours if you need to. You can go to Homefield Apparel and use the code HOME23 to get 15% off your entire first order. Again, that's HOME23 for 15% off. Once again, the website is homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. And with that, it's time to move the ball, find the open man, and get some opening thoughts from the rest of our team. And Bob, I'm going to kick it to you first. Jared has something in here called Moat's Moment. I don't know if he's just kind of workshopping some things, so you can feel free to call us whatever you want. But opening thoughts on the IU victory tonight.
I'll take the Moat's Moment. What I really would love to see is just 40 minutes of sustained effort and focused play. And I mean, I think we got 20 roughly tonight. The first 20 and the first 10 and the last 10. Those two segments in particular. Where IU really, I just in the first 10, I thought they moved the ball pretty well. I thought they moved themselves pretty well. I thought defensively they did a wonderful job. They did a really good job switching. They gave up some semi-open looks, but it wasn't egregious, openings that we saw later in the game. And then the last 10 minutes, when you kind of need to, they kind of let their talent take the front seat and they were able to leverage their talent to open that lead up, like you said in the the banner moment. But I'm really just at that point where it's like, okay, so the step for this team, and I think we found this over the years, getting a 40-minute performance. I'm sure a bunch of people on here who are listening, they watched Auburn versus Duke earlier this week, or some of those ACC, SEC teams. I mean, man, those teams are going at it for 40 minutes. It may not always be completely clean. It may not always be completely good, may get out of control for some times, but it's not that they're just slowed down, bogged down, and then just kind of going into almost an autopilot mode for periods of time in the game. If you do that against in that type of environment, the doors are going to get blown off. And yeah, you're not always going to get that, especially in a bye game. But would definitely like to see IU play to that level where they're just putting forth from every possession. The possession's not over until you get the rebound. The possession's not over until on the defensive end. On the offensive end, the possession's not over till they've secured the ball. It's just playing that just in that way where it's just you're just putting more into it over the course of a 40-minute game. And I've really yet to see that with this team this year.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a concern as what you look at. And I think we talk so much in these about what habits are you forming in the non-conference against in teams where your talent is going to allow you to win. And I think that's, I'll kind of start there because it ties into what you said. I think the habits that are concerning about this team are communication defensively. In terms of allowing a number of open shots and the turnovers, and I guess allowing offensive rebounds, I guess would be 3 if I had to pick 3, and those things really were on display at the end of the first half to me when Miami got back in the game a little bit. IU was up 12 with a little over 5 minutes left in the first half, and from that point forward, IU turned the ball over 5 times and allowed 4 offensive rebounds. Things that really to that point in the game they had not had issues with. I think they had a massive rebound. I know rebound margin isn't everything, but just raw numbers had a pretty big advantage there. But by the time it got to halftime, it wasn't even, but it was close enough. And then the same thing with turnovers. Like really had done a good job of taking care of the ball early. One of the only early turnovers was Omar Ballo trying to dribble the ball up the floor and things like that. But overall, we're making good decisions, taking care of the ball. Really just seemed to relax in that stretch. And I think the miscommunication that I talked about was there as well. Miami was getting open shots. They were pulling IU away from the basket, and IU, even in simple screening actions, were struggling to communicate to one another about where to be. So to me, those are the 3 things that are really plaguing this team. As you look at those, I guess kind of 2-part question. One, is there anything, particularly on the defensive side, that you see schematically that is leading to this, or is it simply just communicating? And 2, which of those things do you think are legitimately fixable as we look forward and Big Ten play starts on Monday, even though I know that's only 2 games, there's a reprieve, but you start to get into a tougher part of the schedule then. So you wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I think schematically, and it just felt a little different early on. I felt like they did a much better job of switching and then communicating switches or switch or stay, whatever their call was. And really, again, using Ballo as a rim protector when he was in was something that was effective. But I think they just need a lot. I think the scheme doesn't help this by any stretch, because I think the way the help is deployed doesn't. It's not something where they're very clear as to who's helping and when. So that exacerbates the problem. But the one where Mbako and Ballo were up top and the guy just slipped and got wide open to the bottom, just got wide open to the basket.
Yeah, they had time to double clutch the pass and he was still open.
Yeah. It's like, that's not that's stuff that, Andy, I know you've coached kids, I coach kids. That's stuff that makes us nuts when you're going, when you're coaching like elementary and middle school kids. When you see, it's like, how did no one picked them up? I mean, no one just got in there. Now, later in the game, when Myles Rice went in and took the charge, that at least showed me there was some progress there where, it's like there's a recognition that, you have to be able to walk and chew gum. And I'm not sure defensively this team knows how to walk and chew gum at the same time. Is it what's fixable? I think of the three, I'm going to go to offensive rebounding. And this has been a frequent problem too. And again, when you give up as many long shots as IU gives up, and they do give up a lot of long looks, you should expect long rebounds. Well, when those long rebounds are going to when those long rebounds are going to kind of go out there, you're not going to really expect Ballo or Reneau under the basket to be able to get those all the time. Your guards need to be in position of shielding players out there from getting the basketball. And also when they're shielding, can then make a play on the ball when they realize where the ball is going. And right now I just feel like even the guards, and I'm not sure what the rebounding numbers for the guards were tonight, but it really just feels like they need to, that's something, I think Rice and Galloway had a combined 4 rebounds. Tucker had a few more. He had 5. But it's just one of those things where it's like being in position and keeping the other team off the boards is just as important, I think, as, going and getting the ball. That's the first step. Keep them off the boards and you go and get the ball. And I don't feel as if times that rebounding is not a team effort for Indiana right now.
It ended up IU gave up 12 offensive rebounds, only led to 8 second chance points. IU actually had fewer offensive rebounds and more second chance points, but certainly some spots where that was an issue. Just to kind of give some numbers, the other things I talked about, turnovers were 16 for IU. Those were a factor. Those led to 20 points for Miami, and they outscored IU points off turnovers 20-12. So I do think that was one that showed up certainly as you look at the stats. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was just going to say real quick, all 8 of those points were in the first half, and they outscored IU 8-2 on second chance points. So that's one of those things where, and there was one sequence, I think they got like 4 offensive rebounds. They had 4 clean looks and they just missed. I mean, sometimes the easy game, it's a simple game. The orange thing doesn't go through the orange thing for your team, for the other team, and you're able to put it through more times and you end up winning. And that felt like that's part of the issue tonight, was that, against Nebraska, I'm not sure you're going to get the same result. And I think that that's probably, if you're a fan, you're sitting at home, you're concerned, that's what you're thinking about. We talked at the start of the show in the beginning. What does this mean? What habits are you getting into? And if you're not treating rebounding as a team effort, if you're not communicating on defense, if you lock in and get tunnel vision on offense, instead of moving the ball as well as you were earlier in the game, and you start trying to win the matchup every time on offense, if that becomes your offensive identity of winning the matchup as the game goes on, against teams that aren't good MAC teams or decent MAC teams, that's going to bite you. And I think Mike Woodson just said that, thanks to producer Eddie for that it's like, making passes, taking chances on passes that weren't there. And he just basically said that, once we start playing Big Ten basketball, they can really put you in a hole. And he recognizes it, but now the question is, what do you do to fix that? And a lot of it's going to have to be getting these guys to play together. And I do think, it may be more than just growing pains. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I would agree with you. One thing I did want to, because it was talked about so much after the last game, was the 2 big lineups. So tonight, by my count, the lineups with Ballo and Reneau were plus 26. I will fully admit that I could be off by a point or two, but I think generally that points us in the right direction. two key runs with that group in there. First was with the starters, which was at the beginning of the game when they jumped out to, I think, a 10, 11-point lead before IU subbed. The second was during that stretch in the second half, and that was the starters except for Luke Goody was in instead of Mackenzie Mbako. And so they had a pretty big run in that stretch. But even the other times that I had flagged them as playing, they were, I think there was 4 stretches where they played 2 bigs. They were plus 11 in one, minus 1 in the other, plus 5 and plus 11, at least is what I had. So that was definitely a net positive tonight. Ballo had 18 rebounds. As I said, led the team with 6 assists, and had 14 points, 5 of 6 from the floor. Free throw shooting felt like he had kind of turned a corner, was 4 of 8 tonight. But 14 points, 18 rebounds, 6 assists. Malik Reneau ends up with 19 points, 7 rebounds. I think 5 of those came in the second half. I feel like he only had 2 at the half. So those 2 guys played well together. I think took advantage of a matchup that was certainly favorable and a team that wasn't playing quite as small as some of the other teams IU's played in the non-conference. But as you look at what IU was able to do with those 2 guys on the floor, what things did you see that were most effective with them out there, short of Ballo just jumping over everyone and getting all the rebounds by the basket?
Yeah, I'll start by and I think water finds its level with the 2 big lineup when they start getting against better competition because of the mobility issues. I mean, I think one thing with the 2 of them on the floor, and I thought that in the first half they did a really good job of getting them moving more north-south versus trying to pound the post. And I think what's important for IU to understand, I would say as fans to understand, looking at Omar Ballo, there's nothing wrong with going to the post, at times, post play. And I think there was one play where Ballo got it in the post and Galloway, Galloway's man went off to dig on him and he just did a pivot, hit Galloway, a perfect cut right down for an easy layup. And boom, your leads back up to double digits, I think, at that point. So the post can be effective. But when it's a forced post play, like later in the game, they had run a zoom action on one side where they got a great look out of it, ran it to the other side, and they were trying to force it into the post, and just I think it was a turnover as a result. When you're trying to force it so much there, get them, there. You have to kind of flow back into, okay, so getting it there is good, but at the same time, how do you get these guys moving north-south? Because I think that both Reneau and Ballo are more north-south players, or at the very least, when Ballo was at Arizona, why he was effective with 2 bigs, they weren't throwing him the ball with his back to the basket. He was setting up in the dunker spot and either pulling away the rim protection, or when the rim protection left, he's there on a dive, he's there on a duck, he's there to get the ball in position and get easy layups. To me, I think that's when you're looking at the 2 of them in the game at the same time, getting them moving and then letting the other guy do more off ball stuff, do more screens, set up some, set some curl cuts up after that, just throw more pin screen actions and pop into the basket sort of moves where you can get some slips potentially and work on that other side. Because I do think in the modern game, you have to have dribble penetration. And when IU figured out how to get, as Tony and Ryan would say, talk about double gaps and triple gaps, single gap, driving through when they created those gaps and created gaps and using the 2-man game and got the ball inside after moving the defense a bit, they were effective. And the only reason you get the defense to move in that situation is that you have to have people moving and you have to have people throw, basically just continuing to kind of on both sides, on the strong and the weak side, doing what they need to do. And I'm not seeing that as the game progresses, you start going back more and more into that sort of, okay, let's try to pound the ball inside. And okay, Malik misses a shot. Well, Ballo has a great advantage, so he gets an easy look off the rebound. So I think a lot of it's just how you get it moving.
Yeah, and I think some of the turnovers that Woodson alluded to in the post game are those ones trying to force it or trying to rush the ball up the court and lob it into them, where the wrong guy's making the pass or the angle is not there to make the pass. Leal is one who's really good at finding those guys from distance, but I think others have struggled in trying to do that. And so yeah, I think you see some of that. And I thought Ballo, for as much as I talked about some of the poor passes he made, in the game earlier this week. I thought he had some really nice ones this time around. And so I think that's a part of his game where he's being asked to do things. As you said, what he was asked to do at Arizona is pretty different than what he's being asked to do here on the offensive end, at least. And so I think that is one part where I think the growing pains comment is probably legitimate, because I do think he's got to work his way into some of the things they want him to do. But I thought, some good flashes and some good just effort plays at times by him. There was even one at the beginning of the game. They really extended the defense. He kind of trapped somebody along the sideline, got a steal that ended up being a hit ahead for a layup. So, I think he's shown some things, but the mobility, to your point, is going to be a potential concern. And I thought he struggled the most even when he was the lone big guy out there, when Miami went to the more stretch forward, we went to Potter, as opposed to Woolfolk, who's a little bit more of a back to the basket guy, not really an offensive threat at all, versus Potter, who could really step out and was willing to shoot and kind of pulled him away from the hoop and pulled him away from the rim, where he was, not able to be a shot blocker in those scenarios. And I think that's where, as you think about getting into playing teams with more talent, more versatile bigs, that becomes a question mark of how he's going to be able to handle some of those things, more mobile guys, and things like that. But that remains to be seen. But I think at least for tonight, the two bigs was an effective lineup, and IU was able to take advantage of of what they brought to the game. And those two combined for 33 points, 25 rebounds, 7 assists. So overall, a solid game from those guys.
You would expect two of your key three that I think Woodson has kind of shown us to do that. I mean, that would be, that would be the sort of result you would want from two of your guys.
Yep, I would agree. All right. Well, we'll take our first break. Remember, go to assemblycall.com and subscribe to our free email newsletter. And when we come back, we're going to continue to break down IU's 76-57 victory over Miami. We'll point out some meaningful moments you might have missed and then go inside the numbers to highlight some important statistical notes from the game. You're listening to the Assembly Call. Stick with us.
This is Verdell Jones. What's better than an epic buzzer beater, the full court dribble, and perfectly placed pass to set it all up? And of course, celebrating with Hoosier Nation afterwards. So join Jared, Andy, Ryan, and Coach on the Assembly Call after every IU basketball game. Go Hoosiers.
All right, welcome back to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Bob Moats of X's and Joe's, and we are breaking down Indiana's 76-57 win over Miami. And now it's time for today's meaningful moment you might have missed.
Meaningful moments that you might have missed.
And today's meaningful moment is brought to you by our friends over at the Hoosier Ticket Project, where they help individuals and families experience Indiana University athletic events in person for the first time through the generosity of alumni and fans. To learn more about how you can donate money or extra tickets to help create meaningful moments for other IU fans, make sure you visit HoosierTicketProject.org. Again, that's HoosierTicketProject.org. As far as meaningful moments, I'll kick us off. Bob, I think it talked about some of the plays in that run that IU had in the second half to extend the lead when things got close. I thought there was another series of plays in the first half. Miami had cut it to 4. Trying to find this in my notes here. Here it is. They cut it to 4 at 25-21. Myles Rice had a good sequence. He really bailed IU out after a possession where there was just no movement. Ends up hitting a 3 on that to push the lead back up. Really good pass to Malik Reneau, who ends up getting fouled, pushes the lead back to 9. Then he gets it up to Ballo, who's fouled, made a free throw, and got it back up to 10. And I thought overall for Rice, it was, again, a little uneven. He was one who got a little bit loose with the ball there toward the end of the first half in that run that I talked about. But overall for him, a really efficient night. He started off by hitting a mid-range jumper on the very first play of the game. First possession of the game for IU. He finishes with 17 points, 6 of 7 from the field, 2 of 3 from 3, 2 rebounds, just had the 1 assist and did have the 3 turnovers. So, again, I think him and Galloway out there together you may have games where one has more assists than the other. Although to be fair, neither of them had a bunch tonight. Galloway had just 2. But what was your impression of Rice's play? I thought he had some nice moments where he really helped stem the tide when things were going wrong, but he also contributed to the snowball effect there toward the end of the first half as well. So a little bit up and down for him, which I think is probably how I describe the first 10 or so games of his career as a Hoosier.
I thought he had his overall impact was more positive than it was negative. And
for sure,
I had the bracket that I had that bracket as one of my meaningful moments too. And that whole sequence where Myles Rice just saw the opportunity and took over. And I'll kind of start with kind of the bad and the ugly part of it, which is I think there are times where he's the sort of player. He was the alpha at Washington State. He's lead guard. He was Pac-10 newcomer of the year last year, right? Pac-12 newcomer of the year. And so I think some of the guys said on the broadcast, one of them said that, these were all guys who were there. A lot of the transfers IU got in, at least with Rice and Carlisle, they were the volume guys. And we didn't see Carlisle due to injury. They were the top volume guys. I think it's a bit of an adjustment for Rice in particular going into this where he's going to be expected to make more level 2 reads, going to the bigs, moving to the basket on 2-man game. He's going to be also expected to make more level 3 reads going in. He's capable of doing those. He's very good at doing those. But when the chips are down, this is a kid that wants to take the shot. And what I loved about the 3 was he kind of created. What I loved about him hitting the 2 bigs in those passes. He was basically taking the game to the edge and pushing it there at a time where he knew they had the momentum and they needed a spark. When he got in the lane for that layup, that one that just kind of floated up, same thing. Sometimes you just need a guy that can go and get a basket. And when your opponent's on a 7-0 run, you can run some actions, or but at that point, your guys may be back in their heels. They may be going 70 or 60% versus 80, 90 or 90% on the action. And that guy goes and gets the shot, and then all of a sudden everybody gets just kind of a wake up and everybody gets back into it, much like Rice was able to do tonight. So yeah, had some turnovers, a couple travels, a couple times where he tried forcing it. But I think on balance, that's a sort of game breaker or game playmaker and shot maker that IU's needed. They had a lot of that in Jalen Hitchcock. They had, but we really haven't seen much of that at Indiana over the last few years, where you just have a guy that can go and get you points. And it's kind of infectious. I mean, I think Trey Galloway, like tonight, kind of, when you start playing more open, guys are able to get better coverages, just better defensive situations, because now there's more things to think about. And thought that Rice had overall a nice game. Although again, there's mistakes and it's a 40-minute game. You're going to have some screw ups along the way, but I think, I don't think that I would not point to that as being, if you're looking at the top tier of the problems, I don't put Myles Rice's performance at the top of that.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I thought played some really good defense in a couple sequences where they just made tough shots over him. But I thought he played well or better on that end. I think he remains a guy who's really good on the ball. Struggles a little bit more off the ball from a defensive standpoint, but yeah, I thought he played well. And I think some of the reasons they didn't have as many assists, I noticed this more in the second half. You may have noticed differently than I did in the first half, but Miami was kind of, doubling the ball off of ball screens and forcing whether it was Galloway or Rice to give it up. So that led to some of those kind of like hockey assists from them that, there was one really nice one as soon as I think Reneau had come back in, or anyway, the 2 bigs had come back in. Galloway gets it to Ballo right about the foul line, dumps it down to Reneau for a dunk. So you had some of those where they're getting the hockey assist or not getting the actual assist, but I think a lot of their low assist totals are maybe more attributed to how the defense played than what they were doing.
I think
themselves.
so, because I do like that little hide that they do with off that ball screen that go into the short roll, which is a great just a great I don't know if it's a read or it's a design. I would assume it's a read, because when the guy leaves and he just goes into that short roll and they hit him, and then Reneau wide open. It works almost like a little press break in that regard, and that's something that you need a guard that makes the smart play, that makes a simple play. And like you were referring to earlier, I think there are times where, and Woodson even alludes to this in the press conference, of gambling on passes that weren't there. Sometimes just make the easy play. And for playmakers, it's hard for them to just make that initial first pass and then let somebody else kind of let the thing work a little bit. I think that's something that you're seeing out of both of them, that there's a little bit, a little more patience, and at times, and I think that helps them a great deal. But I don't know. I think at the end of the day, it's a thing where if they have space to maneuver, they can be very effective, the two of them.
Yep. I've got a couple others, but I'll throw it to you next. Bob, any meaningful moments that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, there were a couple of Trey Galloway 3-point shots that were kind of more created than anything, and it was right at the beginning of the game, and right where I say that about the 16-minute mark, right before the under 16 timeout, where he comes up, Ballo comes up and sets the ball screen, and they said on the broadcast, many of you noticed it too, Miami's going to let Trey Galloway shoot threes. And I think he was 3 for 4 tonight from beyond the arc. So he had a really good game shooting the basketball from beyond the arc. And he just, again, took a couple dribbles, realized that the drive wasn't there on the first read, pulled it back, drained it from the top of the key. And then opening the second half, similar situation where they kind of got the dribble around with Ballo basically passed him and followed into a ball screen and got him just working in those areas where now that Trey Galloway if Trey Galloway is hitting 3-point shots, defenses have something else to worry about, which again, we're talking about getting space for everyone to maneuver, getting that north-south action from your bigs off of 2-man game actions, such as, zoom handoffs or ball screens. Once you get that, where now Galloway, there's an additional thing for them to think about other than he's just going to take it and drive it to the lane. And shooting it, well, if he kills us, it's not a big deal. We weren't expecting it. But now if you have a game plan for that, it really opens up the floor for the rest of your players and allows for just more free-flowing offense, I think. So I think that, the meaningful moments for me were, Galloway, doing, and I think back 2 years ago when he was hitting them well, it was more of a spot up. It really wasn't doing it much off the bounce as much as we're seeing it now. We're seeing some development in his game in his 5th year that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, and he's a guy you look at, we always say that, you can't read too much into plus minus for the game, but he was plus 27. The only guy who was better was Ballo, who was plus 29. I really thought Galloway played one of his better games of the season. I think, it was one pass where it was just like, there's just a turnover. There was no chance he was getting the ball to Ballo where he was trying to pass on the ball, but he had some other nice ones where he hit him with the lob. Was able to get it, set him up for another layup that was really good. And then I think you mentioned the play before where he was on the other end of that, where he made a really nice cut down the lane. Ballo finds him. He gets an easy one. So I think he's getting a bit more comfortable. And I think seeing more of him and Rice together, I think it's a good thing for really both guys, that they can share a little bit of the burden to create and do things like that, and gives each of them a little bit of chance to cut off the ball and do some of those things. So I thought a good game from him for sure. A couple other quick meaningful moments for me. One, I'm sure everybody loved Luke Goody diving on the floor with a minute left in a 19-point game, trying to call timeout to do that. I thought he was, did some of the same things that we've seen from him. Didn't make as many threes, hit that logo 3 from the Simon Scott part on the court. Thought maybe he was in for another big night. I know another one rim out, but got fouled on one, made all 3 free throws, had that and one that I talked about. But, for a team that sometimes you can't quite tell how much they care about what they're doing or with the urgency with which they're doing it, that is not really a concern with him. And I think he played more minutes in the second half as a result, really played over Mbako and I guess Tucker to a degree. In the second half. So he ends up with 9 points, 3 rebounds. So I thought he had that moment. And then the other thing that I just noted, I don't think Anthony Leal had nearly the game that he had a couple nights ago. I did think, and I brought this up earlier, he's a guy who, and I think Coach is the one who's always talked about this with him, about his ability to enter the ball into the post. And now, the plays that I jotted down for him were ones that were more like hit ahead lob type plays. But I thought his passing was really good and continues to get guys as, end of the first half, things aren't going very well. finds, I think it was Malik with 0.6 seconds left. He only made one of the 2 free throws, but stemmed the tide a little bit there. I think there was another long pass ahead that he had at some point that led to a basket or somebody getting fouled. And so I think he is a guy who's been able to make those plays. I thought, again, wasn't as impactful in this game as he was the other night, but there's some little things that he does that this team really needs. And I think it's, he continues to kind of carve out, time for himself. Played 14 minutes tonight, didn't take a shot, didn't really, no stats accumulated except for, for two personal fouls, nearly a 14 trillion if he had not fouled, but still thought he did some good things out there in terms of moving the ball, getting guys in the right place and things like that. And I think his passing continues to be a bright spot for a team that has struggled at times to make the right pass or be able to find guys.
Settles you down. Plays. He's in the right space. He's in the right places usually on defense. There was a miscue between him and Goody, which surprised me. One of those missed switches. It's like,
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep,
those two. What? I even think I was like, hey, how does that happen?
It's funny. It's funny. I looked away during that, and I was writing something down, and I looked back up, and I saw the guy score. And I'm like, man, another miscommunication. But I didn't see who it was. In my head, I assumed that it was not them. And then they showed the replay, and I had the same reaction you did. I was like, really? These two did that?
It's like catching the valedictorian in the class president with a case of beer in the car at lunch. It's like, what do you do? It's like, what, those two? No, wait, what's going on here? And it again, it just goes back to, freaky things happen on a basketball court. Mistakes happen, screw ups happen. And then it's just the frequency is, I think, where we kind of have the conversation of, but in the right place, doing the right things and again, 14 minutes of action. And, it's not a bad night, really it's not, considering McKenzie and Mbako had a 4.9, they were all basically points in that last segment. It was not a good night from Mbako. And I think there have been some years where if a guy like, go back a few years back with Romeo Langford, when Langford was having a night like that, where he just wasn't effective, could you get support from your bench to, fill in the gaps, to be able to put up the number of points that IU was able to put up? I mean, Mbako scores 4 and the team still scores 76 in a 67 possession game, and that's something. You also kind of look at, Goody, he was only on the floor, he only had didn't shoot the ball well from 3, but he still scored 9 points, and that's coming off the bench. That's pretty essential for this program. So it's good to have some bench and it's good to have some support. So, I thought overall, there were some good performances from those two bench guys.
Yep. I would agree. All right, let's go inside the numbers now, which is brought to you by our friends at Jackson Hewitt Tax Services. If you live in Bloomington or the surrounding areas and you want your taxes done right, contact our friend and Chat Mob Hall of Famer Megan Mahaffey and her team in Bloomington, Bedford, and Martinsville by calling 812-339-3334 or by visiting jacksonhewitt.com. Bob, I'll throw this to you first. What stats did you really stood out to you as you look at the box score?
I mean, I think we talked about turnovers, but the turnover rate at 24%, major concern going forward. I think, and they've addressed it in their press conferences as we're picking up on that. I think that they really did but I do think, it's still a decent assist number for them. They had 15 assists on 28 makes. But I think the big one for me, once again, was not just 3-point shooting. The 3-point shooting was more, I think the rate was around a third of their shots. We almost ought to keep a meter of that.
Yeah, 18 out of 52. Okay. So yeah, right about a third. Right about a third would be out of 54. So a little bit more than a third.
A little bit more than a third. So that's a little more than what we've seen. And I think the key there was Mbako went 0 for 3. Goody went 1 for 4. So your two kind of 3-point guys, the guys that you expect to take the 3 for 1 out of 7. But Rice and Galloway went 5 for 7. So now it's showing again, you have multiple guys that can shoot the 3-point shot, which kind of leads you to the point if you're playing open, more open offense. that to and you can definitely get not just a higher volume where you're not just chucking them, but you're actually getting them in the flow of the offense, and you got guys that can make them, which is actually stretching your defenses out, which gives guys like Malik Reneau and Omar Ballo especially room to maneuver and work. So that, I mean, like, you get good 3-point shooting, then when you see Reneau driving and backing a guy down off the perimeter and getting to his hook shot, that becomes a lot easier because Reneau's a good enough passer that if you have to now account for at least 3 guys on the court that can hit it, it means that the defense has to now take the whack-a-mole becomes more in your favor versus to your disadvantage.
Yeah, and they were 4 of 9 in the first half, just 2 of 9 in the second half from 3. But continue to, I think it's, to a certain extent, some of the guys who took it. I think Reneau ended up taking 3, which felt like a lot in that regard. But I wanted to touch on Mbako, and I was going to kind of bring him up in the stats as a way to do that. As you said, he ends up with just 4 points, did have 4 rebounds, 3 assists, only played 24 minutes because he really didn't play a lot during that stretch in the second half. And all 4 of those points, as you said, I think came in the last 4 minutes of the game. Got a play where he just kind of bullied somebody, got to the rim, and then made a really tough turnaround from there. And I think one thing we saw in the game against Sam Houston earlier this week was they seemed to make a concerted effort to get him shots early in the game and get him engaged. He had 4 or 5 shots by the first media timeout on Tuesday or whatever night that game was. And that was not the case tonight. He did not get involved early, and he, I think, whether it was that or something else, kind of struggled as a result. Thought he struggled from just a, kind of looking engaged and putting forth effort standpoint on the defensive end, on the glass, things like that. I think there's a point where you can kind of see this both sides, right? Like, on the one hand, you should say, well, the coaching staff needs to figure out a way to get him involved because that's what gets him engaged in the game. The flip side of that is, like, you're not always going to get the ball. You got to figure out how to get yourself ready to play where you can make an impact on the game, because he's clearly one of the best players they have and one of the best scorers that they have. I'm not even totally sure where I come down with amidst that argument, but what was your impression of, like, what led to him having such a tough outing in a game where it really felt like he should be able to contribute?
Yeah, some nights it's not just your night. And I'll share a story from years ago when I was a college kid, and I actually had a friend of mine worked at the Ball State, TV studio or student station, and Bonzi Wells was going for the MAC scoring title. And I drove him to Toledo from Bloomington. I went to Muncie to go to Toledo. He got me on press row, so I'm sitting with all these NBA scouts. And this guy from the Lakers, Bonzi Wells, doesn't get the record that night. Had like a 15, 16-point game, which for him was low. Ball State still wins. And this guy from the Lakers is going nuts. And he's saying, look at this guy play. He's a scorer. He's not in, he's just, they've shut him off, but he's getting rebounds. He's getting his teammates open. He's hitting them on passes. He's playing tough on defense. He's where he needs to be, help side. He's doing all the little things to disrupt the other team defensively and make his team better offensively. That's why this guy is a pro. And I think Bonzi played a few years in the league. I mean, had at least had a pro career out of it. But that's what a kid what a kid has to learn in this situation is, if you're not going offensively, you got to do something to be positive and get yourself fired up a different way. And then maybe it's too slow defensively. Maybe you have to get fired up defensively, and then it leads to better offense. If there's one thing that they can do to take you out of your game, then every coach in the conference is going to do what they can to take you out early on. And I think that it's kind of a follow the shoe, follow the gourd sort of thing, which is, we're not really sure which one to pick at any given time. I think it's a little bit of both for it to work. But I think the coaching staff has got to kind of continue to work with him as to, okay, so what else can you do? Here's how you kind of battle through that. And that's why I have guys like Calbert Chaney on the bench who played in the league, to be able to kind of help him work on that developmental portion. When the opponent scout takes you out for the first 6 possessions, there's another 50 to 60 possessions we're going to need you in. Another 60 to 70 possessions we're going to need you in. So can we get you back to the point where you're contributing and that you can get yourself kind of back into this as the game progresses. Because at some point you're going to open up and we're going to need you locked in. And some of that's also just maturity and playing college basketball and coming to those realizations that the players have to come to. It's not easy because, again, most guys that are coming in here, even as sophomores, they're used to getting a lot of success in the game of basketball. When it's not going particularly their way, trying to get them, working them through that. That's where relationships matter. That's where culture matters. That's where having a programmatic approach and being and not just your coaches, but also your teammates, lifting you up in those situations.
Yeah, I think that a couple other plays. He threw the ball away twice on baseline inbounds plays where he just threw like a lollipop out to the safety valve on that, and a guy comes from off the from guarding someone else to be able to. Basically, we're kind of carbon copies of one another. Like, to me, those are just kind of emblematic of that. I think your anecdote about Wells is important because I think what the challenge is, and they mentioned this a little bit on the broadcast of, bringing in some of the guys they brought in who have kind of been the alpha, who have been the scorer. You have Mbako, who was already here, but kind of viewed that certainly as what his role was at times a year ago, and was looking to how he was going to build that up as a sophomore. And I think in some ways, the guys that stand out at times on this team, I think it's why Leal's performance stood out so much the other night, is because he was clearly not out there looking to score, but to help do the little things and make everybody around him better. And I think that's where this team is a work in progress from a chemistry standpoint of how does this all fit together when it's not my night to score? How am I going to be able to impact the game? And I think that's where you mentioned culture. I think that becomes really important. And there's a lot of game, for as much as there's a lot of games left, and yet you're almost a third of the way through the season at the same time. But this team has to figure out some of those things of how guys can understand, guys who are programmed to be scorers or to do certain things, how those guys can understand on a given night other things they can do to impact the game in a positive way when the ball's not going through the basket or they're not the one getting shots. And I think there are a lot of guys that struggle with that at times. I think we saw that in the Bahamas, and I think Mbako is the example tonight. It may very well be somebody else on a different night because that wasn't him, a couple games ago. But I think that's going to be something else. We talk about some of the statistical habit type things that we talked about earlier. I think that's the maybe emotional intelligence type thing to look at for that as we go forward, that maybe is a little bit less cut and dried in terms of you can look at a stat sheet and figure out how it's going. But other things statistically, I'll just kind of go over a few. Rebounding, IU did out rebound them 27-13 in the second half. They did. I know you talked about the second chance points that were there, but that margin got dramatically bigger from half one to half two. Points off turnovers, I think we touched on. IU 16 turnovers led to 20 points for Miami. Some, as you mentioned, some quotes in the chat about that that producer Eddie had put in there. And so, bench points was 32-9. IU was outscored tonight. That was kind of the inverse of what happened the other night. Miami had a number of guys step in and score off the bench versus IU's all came from Luke Goody. Points in the paint, 38-14 IU, a pretty big number there. And then the other one I would call out, assists, 15 assists for IU compared to those 16 turnovers is not quite the ratio that you're looking for. Any of those jump out? Any other stats that you wanted to touch on before we break?
Yeah, there was one big one. The kids got their fries at 2 minutes and 47 seconds.
Well, apparently that promotion is going over well. There is a palpable buzz in the arena when that is there.
When you see the second one run out, and you just hear the student section, you're like, man, it's something. So yeah, the kids got their fries tonight. So is it just the kids or is it everybody? I kind of need to know that because I may sneak over for a game with my kid at some point. I want to know if we both get free fries.
I don't know what I would question. I feel like if this is one of those deals where like you can go wherever this is and get the free fries, but what else do you have to order or how much else do you have to spend in order to get the free fries? Maybe that's just cynical of me that it's just not, that there's no such thing as a free lunch, as you would
There
say.
never
I don't
is.
know. Somebody knows more than me, I'm sure, how that works, but I do not yet know. We're hoping to be there in a couple weeks to for a game too. So if I have the luck to find out, I will definitely pass that along. I will say on the free throw shooting side again, IU 14 of 19 didn't get to the line quite as much tonight, but 74% on the game. That continues to be a nice improvement for IU based on what we've seen. They are now 77.3% on the year, 37th in the country. So
it should also be noted that of those of the 5 misses, 4 were Omar Ballo, who pretty much, I think I was watching them trying to play a little bit of Hackaballo a couple times when they were doing the high-low stuff. Balls going in, and there's 3 guys. I mean, they're swarming. Okay, if you can't get the ball, hit him.
Yeah,
it's better than a dunk. So that's and not So that's pretty good across the board.
Yep, I would agree. All right. Well, with that, we'll take our last break, and when we come back, we're going to hand out our game balls and the Hoosier Hustle Award, and we'll also discuss a lingering question or two and look ahead to IU's upcoming opponent. That's all next here on the Assembly Call. Stick with us.
This is Nick Zeisloft. I never miss an open three, and I never miss an episode of the Assembly Call.
All right, welcome back to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Bob Moats of X's and Joe's, and we are breaking down IU's 76-57 victory over Miami. It is now time for our game balls, which are presented by our friends Allie and James over at Bloom Environmental. They want to help you protect your home's air quality, and they know the best way to do that is to stop water at the source. They were voted the best of B-Town in basement services for 4 years running. And their basement waterproofing and crawl space encapsulation is the best defense your home can have against mold growth and structural damage. Mention Assembly Call and get 10% off your system. Call today for a free estimate, or if you just want to hear Allie talk about Kurt Signetti. You can learn more about them over at bloomenviro.com. Again, that's bloomenviro.com. All right, it is time for our game balls, and Bob, I'll give you the honors to go first here. Who gets your game ball for the Hoosiers tonight?
Omar Ballo. I think just a very efficient game across the board. Double led the team in assists. And was a presence on the court from a just from a rim altering position. I think he helped them set the tone early. A big part of that early run was Miami had, I think, one more 3-point shot than they had a 2-point shot tonight, and a lot of that thing had to do with Omar Ballo's presence and just not wanting to challenge him in the lane or dealing with him altering them too much. So I go with Ballo.
That is who I was going to go with as well. I thought particularly at the beginning of the game when they had that run, he was really active. He had, trying to think, I tried to write it down. He had 5 rebounds by the first media timeout, and really continued to do that. Came with some big offensive rebounds in the second half, but really, until that last stretch of the first half, IU had controlled the defensive glass, and he was a massive part of that. The assists are, from him are kind of an added bonus, I would say, as you look at it that way. But I thought one of the best games, if not the best, that he's played in IU uniform so far. Again, 14 points, 18 boards, 6 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal. And plus 29 in 28 minutes is pretty darn good. So Umar gets the game ball. That is his first of the season. Got Mackenzie Mbako is the leader with 3, Myles Rice and Bryson Tucker behind him with 2 apiece. And Reneau, Goody, and now Omar Ballo have 1 in total. So with that, it is time for the Hoosier Hustle Award, which is sponsored by our friends at Evansville Security Services.
The Hoosier Real Hustle Award.
Hi, this is Anthony Leal, reminding you to check out our friends at Evansville Security Services. Based in the hometown of IU legend Calvert Chaney, Evansville Security Services has been providing off-duty police officers to businesses and individuals since 2001. In other words, They're in the business of prevention and peace of mind. And remember, prevention cannot be measured. To learn more about how Evansville Security Services can help you preserve your peace of mind by preventing bad outcomes, visit evansvillesecurityservices.com. That's evansvillesecurityservices.com.
All right. Coach Moats, I'm going to give you the honors here again. Maybe because I'm trying to be nice as the host. Maybe because I'm not quite sure who I'm going to give mine to yet. You can make up your own mind as to my motivation for that. But I'll let you go first.
This is literally the definition of killing an individual with kindness. You know that, right? It's like I got them in the exact same spot. I'm like, because I have an idea and I have a notion.
Good news is I think there are a few different options, which is always better than the alternative of not having any. So
there are a few options, and I think, I think for me it's going to be Trey Galloway, and the reason I'm kind of just thinking of several key plays throughout the game that Trey made. I could have gone Myles Rice in some respects because of some of the, just some of the spurts that he had. Goody getting on the floor and doing some of those little things, but I think overall just bringing that effort, and I think what cinched it for me was when you talked about him. I'm not a big plus minus guy per game, but he and Ballo, and I think a big part of that was the way Trey Galloway played throughout the game. And there's one play, I think it was in the first half, or he got put in jail on a ball screen, which basically means that the ball handler puts him on his backside and is riding him. Trey fights around it, gets the block, and creates a turnover, a deflection off of that. And that's just the sort of hustle that you really want to see out of one of your senior leaders, but also one of your perimeter defenders, where on a team where sometimes we're not always really good at fighting through screens and fighting through those types of scenarios where the other team's being physical. Trey Galloway was there to just get around and kind of and make a big play. So I think he made plays like that pretty much throughout the night, where he was just getting where he needed to be and being disruptive on the other team defensively, but also being just heady and effective on the offensive end too.
Yeah, I was pretty much down to him and Luke Goody as I looked at this. I think Rice, as you said, was probably the third guy that I would have considered. I was leaning toward Galloway. I think it was an efficient performance from him. Scored a little bit more than Luke Goody did, and I thought did some things offensively where he kept the ball moving, and I thought dealt pretty well from a turnover perspective with the way that Miami was trying to defend those ball screens. And the only turnover he had was the one where he just tried to make an absolutely impossible pass across the lane to Ballo for a post up that I still can't even fathom how he thought he could get the ball there, but I appreciate the confidence. So I do like that, but anyway, I'm going to go with him. I thought it was a good game, and I think he is settling into his role a little bit on this team over these last handful of games. I think part of that, Carlisle hasn't been there. Galloway has been able to step in and really make the most of those opportunities, get a little bit more playing time. You can see he's getting kind of back to where he wants to be physically. I think that's a positive sign as well. So I will make it unanimous and go with Trey. That is his, probably not surprisingly, 5th game ball. And he is, I believe, the only guy with more than one at this point. So he takes an early and somewhat commanding lead in the Hoosier Hustle Award. All right. So with that, time for lingering questions, which, I think we touched on some of those earlier. And since we're at an hour, I probably won't belabor those. I think a lot of it to me is what of the, kind of bad habits that this team has shown over some of these games. What of those can get better as we enter Big Ten play when the margin for error and the margin for being able to overcome those things gets significantly less. I will say, the first game that they have is home against Minnesota, which in this year's Big Ten, I think is just about as easy a game as you can get. They're right down there with USC in terms of Ken Pom, one another. So, they got blown out at home by Michigan State earlier in the week. And so I think, that's one where you should be able to get off to a good start. But I was pretty impressed with what Ben Johnson was able to do with them a year ago and how he was able to do that. So I think it's, just how does this team grow, and how do you accelerate taking some of these mistakes that we've seen out of the equation? A couple quotes from the post game on the defensive issues that we talked about. Again, thanks to producer Eddie for helping put these in here. But Woodson talked about the switches, screwed up on so many switches tonight. I thought we've got to clean it up. Need to continue to work on and practice. Galloway said the same thing, just continue to get better because it is early, but we can't have these breakdowns. It's attention to detail. It's little things, but we have to make sure we pay attention to that. I think those are things that, teams that for the most part, short of the last couple of bye games that are left, the teams left on IU schedule are going to make them pay in a way that some of these lesser teams could not. And so the lingering question for me is, how does IU clean that stuff up, and can they clean that stuff up as you get into Big Ten play? Because as we've talked about, based on how the non-conference went, the burden on IU to put up a pretty good win total in the Big Ten, it's a pretty heavy burden, I would say. So you're not going to be able to beat a lot of these teams by continuing to make those mistakes. Bob, any thoughts on that, or lingering questions for you as we move ahead?
I'll circle back to where I was to start the show. 40 minutes of basketball. I want to, 40 minutes of effort, of focused, of staying locked in, being able to play at a minimum, at a floor level that is good to decent. You're going to have problems. You're going to have lulls. You're going to have the other team goes on a run. You're going to have some breakdowns, but just not sustained periods where it just feels like this team is running through mud and sand and muck. And I think that if this team can figure that part out, and we hit on a lot of those, like the whys and the hows, whether it's individually or collectively, I feel like, again, they have the talent to compete with just about anybody, but they have to keep that competitive edge the entire game, and not, you're not gonna be able to win the games coming up. You're not gonna be able to win the matchup for 40 minutes. You're gonna have to put more into it than just talenting your way through to a win. The other big question I have, and this is just, as we go forward, I'm not sure what's going to Kane and Carlisle when he comes back, Gabe Cupps when they come back, with Anthony Leal putting in some quality minutes. Where does the rotation? How do the rotations evolve? With Trey Galloway putting in the sort of quality minutes that he's putting in right now, how do we evolve? So something worth watching in the next couple 3 games is when Carlisle returns from whether it's a lower body injury of some sort, which whatever that issue is. Be interesting to see kind of him in particular, how he gets back in and then figures out how to gel with this team. Because that's the other thing, is it's one thing to have a guy healthy. It's another thing if chemistry is evolving in one direction and the guy gets back into play. How does he move in and fit in with everybody? Because we're still at that point in the season where he hasn't had enough run to really show that yet. So those are mine.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how that plays out. Leal was kind of injured, banged up at the beginning of the season, so he wasn't really there. Not everybody has been healthy in the backcourt for this team over the course of the season. So it'll be. I'm curious to see exactly what that looks like as they, as they figure that out. Be a good problem to have, I think, in a lot of regards of being able to have those guys healthy. But I think Leal's shown you enough that you really would like to try to figure out, how to continue to keep him on the floor. I think he does some things that are important, as I said earlier. So it will definitely be interesting to see what that looks like if and when they get everybody back. Just quick look ahead on Minnesota. They're 6-4 right now, 0-1 in the Big Ten, as I mentioned, lost by 18 to Michigan State. If you look at KenPom, the 4 best teams they played are the 4 teams they've lost to. Their best win came at home by 3 points against Yale, who's just outside the top 100. Had some close games against Central Michigan and Omaha. So this is a team that IU should be able to handle pretty well at home. Dawson Garcia somehow is still in college and is playing for them. So we got that going for us. One thing to look at, though, tempo-wise, they play really, really slow. And so they are among the slowest teams in the country, I believe, as I'm looking at this, in terms of adjusted tempo. So that'll be one to look at that are a bit better on the defensive end than on the offensive side of things. Their offense is currently 166th in adjusted efficiency. So, they've struggled there. Best thing they've done on that side of the ball is not turn it over a whole bunch. And then defensively, they've been decent. Have a pretty solid 2-point defense and block percentage. I'll be interested to see how that holds up against IU's bigs. And they don't put teams on the free throw line a lot. They have a pretty low defensive free throw rate. So be for something that IU's been pretty adept at doing, getting to the free throw line. We'll be interested to see how they're able to handle that. So that game is on Monday at 6:30 Eastern, it looks like, on the Big Ten Network. So a chance for IU to hopefully get off to a 1-0 start in the Big Ten before they head to Nebraska, which I believe is next Friday. So we will see how that goes. But we'll be back. I think I'm back on Monday. I do not know who else will be, but some of us will be back on Monday to talk after the Minnesota game. And with that, I will remind you to check out our friends at Home Field Apparel. Use the promo code HOME23 at checkout to get 15% off your first order. And we will close things down with last call. And Bob, I will give you the honors of going first.
Excited to see what happens in the next tomorrow, big college football day, and seeing what happens with the conference championships, and then anxiously awaiting to see where IU is going to play football in the next for their next game. I'm really hoping for Notre Dame or Penn State. I really want them to play one of the, either the conference team they haven't faced, or go to Notre Dame and play them for the first time since the early 90s. Before the oval logo, I might add.
True. That was I do remember that game. I do remember that game. It's been a while. So yeah, I'll definitely be watching those, see how things shake out as we go through and do that. But in terms of this game, kind of like I said at the beginning, I think if there's things to be excited about, there's things to be concerned about. Feels like and walk away from a lot of these non-conference games feeling that way. I think for those who have concerns about some of the habits that this team has shown and what those look like in Big Ten play, I think those are 100% founded and things that we need to watch. Also, think we've continued to see some growth from certain players. I think what you got from Ballo tonight was impressive. Galloway's playing better. Goody, strings together a couple good games. So kind of riding the roller coaster a little bit of some different things with IU as we head into the next portion of the schedule, where really IU only has 3 games left in the month of December, which is kind of weird. I was looking at our calendar in our where we kind of put what's going on with our family in the kitchen. I'm like, did I miss games on here that I'm not seeing? But actually, I take that back. That was Minnesota that has it. IU has 4 games left in December, so I wasn't too far off. But these 2 games, Minnesota and Nebraska next week, and then home games against Chattanooga and Winthrop later in December. And so, you got 4 games, but at 9 games in, you're almost a third of the way through the season. And so we'll see what this team can do and how they can build on what they have. I think the talent's there, the pieces are there. I think the consistency that you talked about, Bob, really becomes the most important. And the other thing I wanted to touch on briefly, and Jared could probably do this more eloquently than I could, but wanted to give our condolences to the Kaufman family. Bart Kaufman, who people probably know more because the baseball stadium is named for him, passed away. I believe it was on December 3rd, as I have here. And a guy, if you read up on him, was a terrific baseball player at IU. Gave a lot to the university as he got later in life. And one of the things I will say is that he reached out. I think Jared would remember this better than I would, but I think we were doing like a donation drive pretty early on in the show, and reached out, sent Jared a nice note and a donation, and was one of the people, as we kind of texted about it today, was one where I was kind of like, this guy listens to what we're doing and talking about like this, and was just very kind and always very supportive of us. So again, a life well lived by him, by Bart Kaufman. And so our condolences to his family. And if he got any of them hooked on the show and are listening, are certainly our condolences to you, and may he rest in peace. All right, and that will do it for this edition of the Assembly Call IU Postgame Show. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, you make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/assemblycall. And don't forget to go to substack.assemblycall.com to join our free email newsletter. Special thanks to Bob Thompson for the music you hear on the show, and special thanks to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing our logo. And thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU hoops again with you on Monday night. Until then,
take it from me, Jordan Halls. Keep your elbow in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out.
All right. Good stuff. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate you joining us. Producer Eddie, thank you for the great work as always. I had a moment of panic when we were texting about who was going to be here when I thought you might not be. So I appreciate you taking the burden off and leaving me far fewer opportunities to make mistakes, even though I'm sure I made plenty, even in the parts that I did do. So I appreciate you guys both being here on a Friday night, and certainly appreciate all the folks in the chat for being here as well. Looks like Coach got in there. He was lighting up the chat for a period there that I saw. I couldn't keep
I was
up.
about ready to text him the link. I'm like, okay, you want to roll? Let's roll. And I was going to say, Russell Baxter, you are definitely a national treasure. It's good to see you.
Perfect.
It sounds like we have a new C in the category of things Coach Tonsoni hates. Camels, apparently, is the new C. So carrots and camels if you're looking for Christmas gifts for our dear coach.
Man, I mean, who knew? Who knew? You learn a lot.
Too many humps, apparently.
Yeah, you learn a lot on a Friday night on the show, apparently. So, anyway, all right. Well, I hope everybody has a good weekend. Thanks again for joining us. Appreciate you guys for being here, and we will talk to you on Monday.